Hello, my fellow geeks. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Indian AvGeek. My name is Vishal Mehra. Last week we did a show on the Indo-US market, looking back perfectly timed considering how this entire week has been about Modi and Trump's meeting. Now that is done and Trump has even spoken to Putin, US-based airlines must be getting quite excited by the prospect of using Russian airspace. The past week also featured Air India and the big face-off there of the Su-57 Felon and the F-35 Panther. Some of the videos and pictures coming out from that show have been incredible. If you haven't seen that, I'll recommend you do right away. This show is the return of the crowd favorite. Couple of weeks back, I did a show with Evan on the A321 XLR, and I haven't stopped hearing about it from people ever since. So I did the most logical thing and requested Evan to come back and this time focus on a slightly different topic. For the benefit of those who haven't heard the 25th episode yet, Evan is the founder of analyticflying.com, and as you will hear from his lovely accent soon, he's originally from South Africa but now works in Australia as an economist, focusing on airlines and the broader aviation sector. Welcome back, Evan. Let's start with a question I felt I left last time. We spoke in detail about the A321 XLR, right? But how about comparing it with Boeing's offerings in the same market segment? What do you say to that?
It simply doesn't. And what I mean by that is Boeing's offerings don't compare at all to Airbus. And I think, if we're looking at both range and capacity, or payload and capacity, that Boeing just don't have anything. If we look at the 321 range, whether it's the baseline, the LR, or the XLR, capacity-wise, it's somewhat similar to the 737 MAX 10. Give or take a few seats, but it's very much in the same range. I think what we see though is that the MAX 10, in terms of its capability, in terms of its maximum takeoff weight, is just nowhere near. So if we look at the XLR as being somewhere between 97 and 101 tons maximum takeoff weight, the MAX 10 is coming in at about 90 tons. And so there's a very big difference, a very big gap in terms of then the capability in terms of carrying payload or carrying range, or carrying that payload over range, where the XLR really just far exceeds what Boeing can offer with the MAX 10. And that's not even getting into Boeing's challenges with the MAX in terms of deliveries, and also the fact that the MAX 10 isn't certified yet and is nowhere close to being certified. So I think there's an expectation that the MAX 10 is only going to be certified maybe in 2026. So they really don't. There's been a lot of talk for years about Boeing bringing a new middle of the market aircraft to the market, as they call it. This is maybe something that might replace the 767, 757 combination. That's where Boeing would have had maybe a competitive product. It would have been a slightly different product, but it certainly would have been competing for some of that same space. Not all of it, but some of it. Boeing's ability to bring that to market in the short term is just not existent given their challenges. So it's a long way away, and that's really why the XLR has been so successful in terms of sales, relatively speaking. Is because it doesn't really have a lot of competition in that space. And so airlines that are wanting to carry more passengers than their sort of historic range of narrow-body aircraft and carry them over longer ranges, Airbus almost got a free run on that market. And it's not to say the Dash 10 Max won't have a lot of takers eventually. I think it will, but it's not going to be as capable in terms of carrying payload and range as the XLR.
Let's speak about the other new exciting aircraft ordered by both Indigo and Air India. The A350-900 for both of them, and the A350-1000 ordered by Air India. What kind of missions do you see these aircraft playing for both the airlines? From a Indigo perspective, looks like they will be inducting the Norse 787 soon. Now it's official. Maybe they would use the data from these wet lease operations to launch their A350s come 2027 or earlier if Airbus accedes to their demands.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think the if you had have asked me sort of 2 years ago, are Indigo going to be going long haul to London? I would have, probably, I probably would have shaken my head a little bit.
You would have
Um,
called me crazy, Evan. Okay, let's be honest.
Probably, probably. And that's not because they can't do that and can't do that capably. I think what we've seen in terms of Indigo's success is it's not obsessive about recreating or copying what Air India does. I think that's what we've seen historically with a lot of the new airlines in India over the last sort of decade or 2 decades. Is
Yeah.
they've been
And
trying to compete head on with Air India in
and
terms.
Evan, if I'm sorry, if I may add something here, I was
Yeah.
talking with Ajay Aftani. He's a very respected aviation journalist, if I may say that. He has his own
Mm.
website, livefromalounge.com, the other day. And I was talking to him the other day, and he said, he made a point which I found very pertinent. He said, the Indigo of today is different from Indigo when Rakesh Gangwal was around. That Indigo was very well planned. It was, to the T, everything, all steps being taken very carefully, very conservative in its approach. But in the last couple of years, since Rahul Bhatia has taken over more, and of course we've had Peter Elbers. It's this Indigo is much more of hustle. It's a much more open-minded Indigo. It's a Indigo with much greater ambitions. So maybe that's what's also at play here.
Absolutely. I think the they certainly are more ambitious, but I think we've also got to keep in mind that they also are not. They're maybe not taking the same ego-driven decisions that some of the others are taking or took,
Right.
in generations past. I think if you go back to Kingfisher days, Kingfisher was in a way based on more around ego in terms of wanting to put out these sort of high-end luxury products. That was almost what they were going towards, and they never even got to it in most of the cases. So I do think they're certainly Indigo are more ambitious, and I think that's why if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I think I would have still stuck to that view that they were a lot more pragmatic. But if you think about the decisions that they're making, they're still well within their scopes. So they're bringing on the XLR, but the XLR is pushing the envelope a little bit, not a lot. They're looking to run that into 2,000, 2,500, maybe up to 3,000 nautical miles. That's not really pushing the envelope that much further. The A350s, on the other hand, it's relatively lower risk. And the reason why it's relatively lower risk is they're pushing it a little bit further from where the XLR is. But also, it's only 30 aircraft, and it's not they're of enough of an established airline and established business nowadays that 30 A350s isn't going to take them under if it's not a roaring success. That if you look at the size of their fleet in terms of A320s and 321s and how successful they are there, I think it's different when you're taking on 13 A350s if you've only got 50 or 100 aircraft. When you've got a fleet of of the size they have right now, it's maybe not as crazy a prospect. But that said, I
400
think
plus narrow bodies now, I think 400
yeah,
plus.
I mean it's astonishing. Indigo in terms of aircraft are bigger than the entire Qantas group. in terms of number of aircraft. Obviously, it's a different sort of aircraft. That just puts it in perspective just how big they are. 400 aircraft, they're up there with some of the biggest airlines in the world in terms of fleet size. So 30 A350s isn't going to isn't suddenly going to break them. So I think that's an interesting perspective. But I don't think we're going to see much radical. I think obviously Delhi Manchester is already showing out that to be what we expect from the A350s. Major European hubs. London, Manchester, Paris, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, Rome, Milan, etc. And I think we already see that from Delhi Manchester. There are other options as well. I think possibility of into Australia, South Africa are places where they might look at extending the A350s as well. I think the big question is, does IndiGo start going towards the United States? And that's where I think not for the time being. I think that's where there'll be a little bit more pragmatism, because the economics of ultra long haul flying is very different to an 8-9 hour leg to Europe. And once we start getting into ultra long haul flying and the much higher costs of ultra long haul flying and the need to generate those higher yields, that's where their low cost model might be pushing it a little bit too far. So I think on the IndiGo side, I think that the A350 does have a sort of an envelope for them, and that envelope is not going to be the same envelope for Air India. I think with Air India, we're already seeing deployment of A350s, as a flagship for them at the moment, and that's because in the short term, the A350 has the best onboard product for them. I think it's been well spoken. A lot of criticism in the last few months and years of the hard product on the 777s for Air India, and the A350s coming factory new, or somewhat factory new, with a newer onboard product. So we're seeing them being deployed on flagship routes, and until we start seeing significant numbers of the 787-8 and the 777s with new cabin interiors, what we got to see is that Air India are going to focus those A350s on flagship routes. They're not going to be focusing them particularly, let's say, on long range or medium haul or whatever that might be, until they start having a more consistent, better onboard product across the fleet. And then once that's occurring, which I think is still several years away, and we start seeing a more consistent and better product across the fleet, then we might start seeing an optimization between, let's say, 787s, 777s, and 350s based on capacity versus range, etc. So, but in the interim, I think it's pretty clear that the new build A350s are going to be focused on those flagship routes, London, New York, which we're already seeing. I think the A350-1000 is a little bit different because it's a much bigger aircraft than the 350-900, and it also has, because of much bigger maximum takeoff weight and higher fuel capacity and a bigger wing as well, it really does also have really good range capabilities. And so I think over time, what we're going to see is the A350-1000 is really going to become part of the mainstay of the ultra long haul flying. And by that I mean, that ultra long haul flying, for example, to California in the US, which currently requires the 777-200 long range. I think we're going to see that the A350-1000 really being both an ultra long range aircraft, be over and beyond what the Dash 900 is capable of. So the Dash 900, what's really interesting is that it has quite a wide envelope of capability. We've seen it has multiple takeoff weight options, and even the option of the additional fuel tank, which Singapore Airlines use, but India and other carriers don't. And so, the Dash 900 it doesn't really have the long range capability that the Dash 1000 has in the form that Air India have got it in. And so I think we'll see that as being, East Coast US, certainly a lot of Europe, but it's not going to go, I don't think, to West Coast US. That will be up to ultimately the Dash 1000 down the line. And that really does have a lot of range capability that some of the other aircraft don't have. And it's probably going to be, relative to anything else in the fleet, it's more similar in terms of that range to the 777-200LR. But it's going to do that a lot cheaper because it's a more modern aircraft that burns less fuel to do that.
So according to you, Evan, Air India will use its A350-1000s for West Coast flying only?
I wouldn't say only, but I think that's a big part of its role.
Okay.
A big part of its role is going to be for that US West Coast flying, but also it's a bigger aircraft, so it's bigger than it's going to be bigger than anything in the fleet other than the 777-300ER or down the line the 777-9. So it's still also a big aircraft, and that we might see it in some other routes as well. But I think it's in the shorter term. I don't say short term, but in the shorter term, I think I would really expect to see it on the US West Coast.
How does the A350 compare to its main competitor, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner? How will missions for both differ as far as Air India is concerned?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think they're both great aircraft, and I think a lot of people like to somehow convince other people that the one is better than the other, or etc. I think on one hand, they're slightly different sizes. So the 787-8 is much smaller than the A350-900. The A350-1000 is much larger than the 787-9. So from a size perspective, they're slightly different. They both really have good long-range economics. They both are lighter than their previous generation of aircraft in terms of the use of composite materials, etc. So they're both great aircraft and have really developed quite well. I think in the short term, I think what we also know is that the capability of the different manufacturers to deliver is different at the moment. It's not to say that Airbus are doing amazing in terms of A350 deliveries, but I think Airbus are delivering A350s more predictably than compared to what Boeing are delivering the 787s relative to their baseline. So if you go back to before the pandemic, Boeing are delivering around 158 787s a year. At the moment, they're struggling to hit 50 a year. Airbus were delivering about 100 A350s a year, but they consistently hit sort of 60, 70 a year. So in the short term, I think the biggest upside is that Air India have ordered both the 787 and the A350, which means that they're hedging their bets a little bit, that if one manufacturer does better at delivering than the others or delivering on time, they've hedged themselves a little bit. But in terms of different aircraft, I think what's interesting is that the 787-8 is a relatively small wide body by the current market standards in terms of what we're seeing around there. And so that's a really interesting aircraft because it gives them a capability of flying a slightly smaller aircraft, and maybe that allows them to hit a few more additional city pairs that they might not have been able to if they had a larger aircraft. Would they order a 787-8 new today? I don't think so. I think they would have ordered the 787-9, but it is what it is. And they're a sunk cost in that they're pretty much fully paid for. So what I think is really interesting is that it gives Air India this incredible range of options, of size, from the smallest wide body on the market available today to the biggest wide body available, and a bunch of things in between. And they're using the fact that they've got a big enough fleet to have a lot of flexibility then within that fleet. They'll have 787-8, 787-9. They'll have 350-900, 350-1000, plus the 777s. both existing and down the line new. So it gives them a lot of flexibility in terms of scale, particularly, but also all of them are really capable in terms of fairly long, long haul flying, and even in many cases ultra long haul flying. So it's really about using that scale to have that flexibility, which I think is not a thing that not a lot of carriers can do. They simply don't have that scale to allow that, and that will allow them to put wide bodies on medium haul when they need to, but also even pick the right aircraft for going on even the most ultra long haul missions, whether that be West Coast US, and even going further. I think we've been hearing things of interest in places like Dallas. So it really does give them that scope to be able to really push the envelope a little bit.
The other major aircraft type, and you touched upon it briefly earlier, Air India and Indian Aviation, I would say, is looking forward to is the 777X. Currently, the entry into service is 2026. We'll see how it goes from there. And Lufthansa is the launch customer. Now, if things go well from there, some airframes might reach Air India by 28, 29 or so. Where do you see that aircraft flying for Air India? Which routes?
Firstly, it's good that you sort of couch that question within the uncertainty of delivery, because we really don't have any idea when Air India will get that aircraft, and even if by best case scenario, and it gets certified in 2026, Air India is not at the front of the line, simply because other players, Emirates, Lufthansa, for example, specifically, are at the front of that line. I think firstly, what's noticeable is that Air India have ordered so far, I think it's only 10. Obviously, that can increase, but that really gives an indication that they're not going all in on the aircraft, and that's maybe a good thing given the uncertainty around delivery. But the first thing for me is that I look at the 777-9, and it's certainly an improvement on the -300. But what sort of improvement? And it's almost like we can think of it as a neo, a new engine option that the -9 is taking a lot of the advancements.
Way of looking at it, Evan. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because fundamentally it's much of the same aircraft as the 777. It's pretty much the same fuselage. It's been lengthened, so they've added in a few more pieces to lengthen it a little bit. It's got a new wing, and that new wing is obviously a big part of the aircraft. And I think a lot's been said about the folding wingtips to allow it to utilize a lot of existing infrastructure. But the real advantage in terms of what it takes from the sort of the 787 era is very much the engine, and a much updated engine, which is really going to sort of improve the efficiency of the aircraft. But what's fascinating is that the maximum takeoff weight is still the same as the 777-300ER. So they're not looking at really boosting that maximum takeoff weight at all. And that's really interesting, because it means that it's going to be slightly bigger than the -300ER, and that they're utilizing that weight to be able to carry not more fuel necessarily, but because those engines are more fuel efficient, it's going to then utilize that fuel a little bit better. So it carries a little bit more passengers on a little bit of a longer mission than the -300. So it really is a neo in that respect, in that it utilizes a lot of similarities from its predecessor, and really focuses on the improvement from the engines. In terms of what that role that plays for Air India, it's to be a very large aircraft. There are several routes where Air India is going to, in the long term, still be constrained in terms of whether it's London Heathrow, where slots are very scarce, or routes like JFK, where higher frequency operations don't really add a huge benefit like it might on a shorter route like to Europe. And so on routes like Delhi JFK, Delhi London, where that sort of just raw capacity is needed. And if we look at new build aircraft today, with the A350 and the 747-8 no longer available as new build aircraft, the 777-9 really is, by a significant margin, the biggest aircraft available. It's much bigger in terms of passenger capacity than, for example, the A350-1000. So that's what Air India is looking at it for. I think is a VLA, a very large aircraft that's going to be able to carry bigger passenger loads or bigger payloads on those trunk routes and to the major centers. London, JFK, I think are the two obvious ones, or London, New York are the two obvious ones. And if we think about timing, it's pretty good. And you mentioned around 2027. And if we look at Air India's 777-300ERs, which are the biggest aircraft in the fleet at the moment, the eldest ones are 17 years old. And so in 2027, they'll be 20 years old. They'll be due a D check around 24 years old. And so, we could quite conceivably see the Dash 9s, or 787-9s, replacing some of those older 777-300ERs, post 2027. But I really think it's going to be a niche aircraft for Air India, and it's going to be a niche that's going to focus on those major routes where there are very big passenger flows, where there are sort of limitations, exogenous limitations, whether it be slots or just some of those particularly ultra long haul routes where maybe frequency isn't going to be a huge advantage. I think it's a great aircraft for Air India. And again, it's a low risk one in that it's a fleet type that they know well. It's going to have fleet commonality to the existing 777s, and it will integrate seamlessly if and when Boeing can actually get it certified and delivered.
Indeed, it's the billion-dollar question, rather.
I mean, it's a $1 billion question, and I think as the longer it goes on, I think the more of a risk it is to Boeing, should we say, rather than a risk to the airline customers. From the airline customers, it's not that it's not that another manufacturer is coming along and offering a very large aircraft. So if Air India doesn't get it, it means nobody gets it. But that said, Boeing have invested a huge amount of money into it, and still not delivering it. And if they don't deliver, they can't sell.
Evan, what a fantastic conversation. Thank you for taking out the time again. This has been an absolute pleasure.
What I want to say is that thanks so much for having me. It's been really fun. As I said to you before, I think this is the first podcast I've actually done. So it's a new experience for me, and really enjoyed it, and really enjoy following the Indian market as well. I think to me, as a non-Indian in Australia, it's one of the most exciting and fascinating markets in the world, because of the dynamism in the market and the incredible growth that we see in the market. So I really enjoy looking at the Indian market, and enjoy engaging on it as well. And so just very happy and excited to be part of it. Hopefully we can do more of it, because I've really enjoyed it as well. Thanks so much for the time.
True to form, Evan delivered, and how. Loved our chat. We have some more interesting geekiness coming up in the coming weeks. Topics we haven't touched so far, but very much related to aviation geekiness. Till then, rate the show on the podcast app of your choice, whether that's Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Pocket Casts, whatever you choose. And some feedback to go with it, please. Evan is at Analytic Flying on X, and I am at Vishal Mehra. With that, I wish you well and happy flying, my friends.